My brother called me a leech for living with our parents, so I canceled his credit cards and left him homeless. My younger brother called me a leech for living with our parents, so I canceled his credit cards and left him homeless. Let me tell you how Blake went from living like a trust fund baby to flipping burgers for minimum wage. All because he couldn't keep his mouth shut when it mattered most. It started 2 years ago when I made the biggest mistake of my life. Adding Blake to my American Express and MasterCard accounts. I thought I was being a good big brother, helping him build credit for his junior year at Northwestern. Blake was 22, charismatic, and had this way of making everyone believe he was destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I was 28, single, and had just moved back into my childhood home in Naperville to help care for our parents. Dad had suffered his third stroke that spring, leaving him dependent on oxygen tanks and round-the-clock monitoring. Mom's diabetes had progressed to the point where neuropathy made simple tasks like eating nearly impossible. Someone had to step up, and since Blake was busy building his personal brand on social media, that someone was me. But Blake saw my sacrifice differently. To him, I was Jonathan the failure, the older brother who couldn't hack it in the real world and came crawling back to mommy and daddy. Never mind that I was running a successful web development consultancy from my laptop. Never mind that I was pulling in decent money while juggling parent care. In Blake's narrative, I was the cautionary tale he loved to share with his 50,000 Instagram followers. The spending started small. 100 here, 200 there, just to hold me over until my influencer deals kick in, he'd say. But Blake had expensive taste. While I was researching Medicare coverage and scheduling doctor appointments, he was hitting up Nordstrom and Best Buy, charging everything to my cards. Jordan 4s for $400, designer hoodies for $300, the latest iPhone for $1,200, all justified as investments in his brand. His TikTok account, @BlakeBuildsWealth, painted him as this young entrepreneur on the rise. Expensive coffee shops, designer outfits, tech gadgets, the lifestyle content his followers craved. What they didn't see was my credit card statements, growing by thousands each month. What they didn't know was that their inspiration was funding his fake lifestyle while calling his older brother a basement-dwelling loser. The content about me started as jokes. POV, your older brother moves back home and becomes everyone's problem. But as his follower count grew, so did his cruelty. He'd film me carrying dad's oxygen concentrator upstairs, adding captions like, "When your 28-year-old brother can't afford his own place so he becomes the family burden." The comments were brutal. "I'd rather live in my car. How embarrassing. Some people just never grow up." Each video hurt, but I told myself it was just Blake being Blake. All flash, no substance. I figured once he graduated and got a real job, this phase would end. I had no idea he was just getting started, and that his next move would cost me everything I'd worked for. The videos escalated from occasional jokes to a systematic campaign of humiliation. Blake had discovered that content about loser family members performed exceptionally well with his audience, and I had become his most valuable asset, the perfect example of everything his young followers feared becoming. Day 47 of living with my failure of a brother became a series. He'd catch me at my most vulnerable moments, spoon-feeding mom her dinner because her hands shook too much to hold utensils, helping dad to the bathroom at 3 a.m., organizing his medication schedule. Each caregiving moment became content for Blake's successful mindset brand, proof that he'd never let himself settle for mediocrity, like his older brother. His followers ate it up. Comments flooded in, "Blake, you're such an inspiration for not ending up like that. Thank God you have ambition. Your brother is literally living the NPC life." The more engagement he got, the more creative his cruelty became. He started staging scenarios, like loudly taking business calls about million-dollar opportunities, while I was in the background doing laundry or preparing dad's medications. Meanwhile, my credit card bills were becoming impossible to ignore. What started as a few $100s a month had ballooned to $3,000, then $5,000. Blake's investments in his brand included a $2,400 camera setup, a $800 ring light, and a wardrobe that would make a celebrity stylist jealous. Every purchase came with the same promise: "This is going to pay for itself in sponsored posts. I'll pay you back triple once my agency deal comes through." But the agency deals never materialized. The sure thing sponsorships fell through. The only thing growing was his online presence and my debt. By winter, he was burning through $6,000 a month of my money while publicly shaming me for being a financial burden on our family. The breaking point should have been the Christmas incident. I was setting up Dad's new nebulizer when Blake burst into the living room with his phone already recording. "Check this out, guys. Christmas morning with the family disappointment." While normal people my brother's age are buying houses and starting families, he's over here playing nurse to avoid adult responsibilities. Mom started crying. Dad, weak as he was, tried to tell Blake to stop. But Blake was performing now, feeding off his live audience's reactions. It's honestly sad, guys. Some people just refuse to grow up and take responsibility for their own lives. I should have cut the cards that day. Should have thrown him out. Should have chosen my own dignity over keeping the peace. But Mom begged me not to make things worse during the holidays. Dad was having good days and bad days, and I didn't want to add family drama to his stress. So I enabled Blake for another 2 months, watching my savings dwindle while he built his brand on my financial grave. I told myself I was being the bigger person, that family was more important than money, that Blake would eventually mature and make things right. I was wrong. Blake wasn't building toward anything except my public destruction, and his masterpiece was still to come. By March, I was drowning in Blake's debt but finally seeing light at the end of the tunnel. After months of networking and proposals, I had landed the opportunity of a lifetime, a meeting with Catherine Mills, the CTO of Pinnacle Solutions, one of Chicago's fastest-growing tech companies. Catherine had been impressed with my portfolio during our initial Zoom calls. My web development consultancy had handled several mid-size projects, but Pinnacle represented something entirely different. A $150,000 annual contract to overhaul their entire digital infrastructure. It was the kind of deal that would triple my income overnight and finally give me the resources to hire professional home care for Dad. We had scheduled the meeting at the Starbucks on Michigan Avenue, neutral territory where Catherine could feel comfortable before potentially inviting me to their offices. I had spent weeks preparing or researching their current systems, identifying inefficiencies, crafting solutions that would save them both time and money. This wasn't just another client pitch. This was my ticket to financial independence and the ability to give my parents the care they deserved. I arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table where we could spread out documents and talk without interruption. Catherine arrived precisely on time, a sharp woman in her 40s with the kind of confidence that comes from making million-dollar decisions daily. We exchanged pleasantries and I launched into my presentation. For 40 minutes, everything went perfectly. Catherine asked detailed questions about timeline, scalability, and integration with their existing systems. She nodded approvingly at my security protocols and seemed genuinely excited about the user experience improvements I proposed. When I quoted my annual fee, she didn't flinch. "Jonathan, I have to say this is exactly what we've been looking for," she said, pulling out a tablet with the contract already loaded. "Your approach to data migration alone would save us 6 months of headaches." My heart was racing as she scrolled through the terms. This was it, the moment that would change everything. No more watching every dollar while Blake burned through thousands. No more choosing between my business growth and my parents' medical needs. Finally, I could be both a successful entrepreneur and a devoted son. Catherine's stylus hovered over the signature line. "I think we can move forward with this. The board will appreciate the cost savings, and your timeline gives us exactly what we need for our Q4 launch." I was already mentally calculating the possibilities. A full-time nurse for Dad, better specialists for Mom, maybe even moving them to a single-story house more suited to their needs. Blake's credit card bills would become a minor irritation rather than a financial crisis. The Starbucks door chimed and I glanced up reflexively. My blood turned to ice. Blake had just walked in with 3 of his usual crew, Kevin, Austin, and Tyler. All of them dressed in the designer clothes my credit cards had purchased. Blake's eyes swept the cafe and landed directly on our table. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face as he recognized Catherine from our video calls that he'd occasionally interrupted. "Showtime," I heard him whisper to his friends, pulling out his phone. Well, Blake's voice cut through the coffee shop's ambient chatter like a knife. He was already recording, his phone pointed in our direction as he approached with his entourage trailing behind. If it isn't my big brother Jonathan, desperately chasing down another client. I felt Catherine tense beside me. Her stylus froze inches from the contract signature line. The entire Starbucks seemed to quiet as Blake's theatrical voice commanded attention from every customer. "Catherine, right?" Blake continued, his tone dripping with fake familiarity. "I'm Blake, Jonathan's younger brother. The one who's actually successful." He gestured to his designer outfit, all purchased with my money. "I've told my 60,000 followers all about my brother's situation." The color drained from my face. I tried to intervene. "Blake, please, not now." "Oh, but this is perfect timing." Blake's voice grew louder, more performative. His friends formed a semicircle behind him, some filming with their own phones. "Catherine, You should know what you're really getting into before you sign anything with my brother here. Catherine's professional smile faltered. She glanced at me with confusion, then back at Blake with growing discomfort. See, Jonathan here is 28 years old and still lives with mommy and daddy, Blake announced to the increasingly uncomfortable cafe. Can't afford his own place, can't support himself, still needs his parents to take care of him like he's some kind of overgrown child. That's not, I started, but Blake's performance was in full swing. My man's out here desperately begging for business contracts while living rent-free like a complete leech, Blake continued, his phone capturing every moment. It's honestly embarrassing for our family. I mean, what kind of businessman can't even afford his own apartment? The entire coffee shop was staring now. Other customers were pulling out their phones, recognizing Blake from his social media presence. I could see Catherine's expression shifting from professional interest to something between disgust and pity. Blake, you don't understand the situation. I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper. Oh, I understand perfectly, Blake shot back. You moved back home because you couldn't make it in the real world. You're literally a grown man who needs his mommy to cook his meals and wash his clothes. And now you're here trying to convince this successful woman to trust her company's future to someone who can't even manage his own life. Kevin and Austin snickered behind him. Tyler was live streaming the whole thing to his Instagram story. I could see the viewer count climbing in real time. Catherine slowly pulled the contract back toward herself. The stylist disappeared into her purse. Perhaps, she said carefully, her voice now cold and distant, we should revisit this at a later time. Catherine, wait. I stood up, but she was already gathering her things. I'll have my assistant reach out about rescheduling, she said, but we both knew there would be no rescheduling. She walked past Blake's crew and out the door, leaving me alone with my humiliation and the sound of Blake's triumphant laughter. Did you guys get all that? Blake asked his followers, still filming. Sometimes you have to save people from making terrible business decisions. The $150,000 contract, my parents' future security, my business breakthrough, my ticket to independence, had just walked out the door and my own brother had held it open for her. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom staring at my laptop screen, unable to process what had just happened. Downstairs, I could hear Blake loudly retelling the Starbucks story to his friends over FaceTime, his laughter echoing through the house like nails on a chalkboard. You should have seen his face when she pulled that contract back, Blake was saying. Absolutely priceless. The second-hand embarrassment was real. His friends were eating it up. Dude, you literally saved that woman from making the worst mistake of her career, Kevin's voice carried up the stairs. Imagine trusting your company to someone who can't even trust himself to live independently. I pulled up my banking apps, something I'd been avoiding for weeks. The numbers stared back at me in black and white, more devastating than I'd imagined. Blake had racked up $52,000 across my 3 credit cards. $52,000 of designer clothes, expensive meals, tech gadgets, and impulse purchases while publicly calling me a financial parasite. The American Express statement alone was 15 pages long. Supreme hoodies for $400 each. Off-white sneakers for $800. A Rolex Submariner for $12,000 that he'd bought for content creation. Dinner at Alinea for $600 per person. Him and 3 friends celebrating his brand partnership that never existed. Bottles of Dom Perignon at clubs, first-class flights to Los Angeles for networking opportunities, a week at the Beverly Hills hotel that cost more than most people's cars. Every single purchase had his name attached, but every bill came to me. For 2 years, I'd been funding his fake lifestyle while he built a social media empire on the foundation of my financial ruin. His 60,000 followers thought they were following a young entrepreneur's rise to success. In reality, they were watching my slow descent into debt. I scrolled through his recent posts with fresh eyes. The $3,000 Balenciaga outfit he'd worn to close a major deal? My money. The luxury apartment tour he'd filmed last month? He'd rented it for a day to create content, charging the $2,000 fee to my visa. The motivational post about investing in yourself, while showing off his new MacBook Pro, iPad, and iPhone? All purchased within the same week, totaling $8,000 of my earnings. But what hurt most wasn't the money, it was the realization that every dollar he'd spent was accompanied by content designed to humiliate me. He'd built his entire brand on my supposed failures while literally living off my success. He turned my sacrifice for our parents into entertainment for strangers who would never know the truth. Downstairs, Blake was still performing. The funniest part, he was telling his audience, is that he actually thought he was going to land that contract. Like, what serious businesswoman is going to trust someone who can't even handle his own basic adult responsibilities? That's when it hit me. The realization came with startling clarity. I'd been so focused on being the good son and understanding brother that I'd enabled my own destruction. I'd prioritized keeping peace in the family while Blake declared war on my reputation, my finances, and my future. I looked at those credit card statements again. $52,000 of evidence that Blake wasn't just ungrateful or immature. He was deliberately sabotaging me while enriching himself, and he'd been doing it so long that he'd started to believe his own lies about who was the real parasite in this relationship. The plan wasn't really a plan at all, just the obvious action I should have taken months ago. At 11:47 p.m., I opened my laptop and began systematically destroying Blake's world. American Express first. I logged into my account and stared at the authorized users section. Blake's name sat there innocently, with no indication of the financial devastation he'd caused. One click. Remove user. Confirm. The first domino fell. MasterCard next. Same process. Click. Remove. Confirm. Visa took an extra step. I had to call their 24-hour customer service line and explain that I was removing an authorized user due to misuse of privileges. The representative was professional and efficient. The cards will be deactivated within 1 hour, she confirmed. Finally, I pulled up Chase and closed Blake's access to my business account, the one I'd foolishly added him to for emergencies. The emergency, I realized, was protecting myself from him. By midnight it was done. 2 years of financial access, terminated with a few clicks and one phone call. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring either the accountability Blake desperately needed or the tantrum I'd been avoiding. The first text came at 8:43 a.m. Yo Jonathan, my card got declined at Whole Foods. Fix whatever's wrong with the limit. I need to meal prep for content today. I stared at the message, remembering Catherine's disgusted expression as she pulled the contract away. I typed back, cards are canceled. Find your own money. 2 years of free rides just ended. My phone immediately started buzzing. Call after call, which I ignored while getting Dad set up with his morning medications. Then the texts began flooding in. What do you mean canceled? This isn't funny, bro. I need those cards for content creation. You can't just cut me off like this. I have brand obligations to fulfill. My followers expect a certain lifestyle. You're ruining everything I've built. By 10 a.m., he was calling from the Supreme store, his voice cracking with desperation. Jonathan, what the hell did you do? The cards don't work. None of them work. My boys are here watching me get declined. This is humiliating. Maybe you should have thought about humiliation before you destroyed my business meeting yesterday, I replied calmly. Parasites don't get to use other people's credit cards. Look, I'm sorry about the Starbucks thing, okay? I didn't know she was that important. It wasn't personal, it was just content. My followers love that stuff. It was personal when I lost a $150,000 contract, I said. It was personal when you called me a professional leech in front of the most important client of my career. But more than that, it's been personal for months while you spent my money and called me a failure. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I heard something in Blake's voice I'd never heard before. Genuine fear. But what am I supposed to do? I have rent due next week. I have dinner plans with investors tonight. I have a whole content calendar planned around Spring Fashion Week. You can't just destroy my life over one stupid mistake. One mistake. I almost laughed. Blake, you've spent $52,000 of my money while building a social media brand around humiliating me. That's not a mistake, that's a lifestyle choice. And that lifestyle just ended. The collapse was swift and merciless. Within a week, Blake's carefully constructed image began cracking. He tried to maintain his content schedule, but without my credit cards funding his lifestyle, the illusion became impossible to sustain. His luxury apartment tour became a frantic search for a roommate to split his rent. His investment opportunity dinner meetings became him applying for server positions at downtown restaurants. His girlfriend, Madison, lasted exactly 9 days after the cards were cut. She'd been drawn to the lifestyle Blake projected: expensive dinners, weekend trips, designer gifts. When he couldn't afford to take her to Gibson's Steakhouse and suggested Chipotle instead, she discovered what I'd known all along. Without other people's money, Blake had nothing to offer. She said I'm not the man she thought I was, Blake told me 3 weeks later, standing in my doorway looking genuinely defeated for the first time in years. All my friends think I'm broke. My engagement is down 60% because I can't afford the lifestyle content anymore. His follower count, built on aspirational content about success and wealth, began hemorrhaging. Turns out people don't want motivation from someone who can't afford their own lunch. His brand partnerships evaporated when he couldn't maintain the image that had attracted them. The sponsors who had been almost ready to sign, suddenly stopped returning his calls. By April, Blake was working at Buffalo Wild Wings, pulling double shifts to make rent on a studio apartment in a neighborhood he'd previously mocked in his content. His designer wardrobe, purchased with my money, sat unworn in his closet while he wore the same 3 BWW polo shirts in rotation. "I didn't know," he said one evening, sitting at our parents' kitchen table with his head in his hands. "I didn't know you were making that much money or that the contract was that important. I thought you were just, I don't know, struggling like I always assumed." "You never asked," I replied, not looking up from Dad's medication schedule. "You just decided I was a failure and built your entire personality around being better than me." But the content performed so well. People loved the family dysfunction angle. I started believing my own narrative. While spending my money to fund your fake success story. Blake was quiet for a long time. Finally he said, "I can pay you back. It'll take time but I can do it. $52,000, right? I'll get a second job. I'll sell everything." I looked at my younger brother, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The cocky influencer was gone, replaced by a 24-year-old kid who'd learned the hardest lesson of his life. He looked smaller somehow, humbled by the reality of paying for his own existence. "Keep the stuff," I said finally, "but you'll pay back every dollar. And Blake, if you ever, and I mean ever, humiliate me publicly again, you'll discover that canceled credit cards were just the beginning of what I'm capable of." 6 months later, Blake had paid back $8,000 and was on track to clear his debt within 5 years. His social media presence had evolved from fake lifestyle content to genuine documentation of his journey from spoiled influencer to working adult. Ironically, his broke but building content performed better than his fake success stories ever had. As for me, Catherine Mills never rescheduled our meeting, but word got around Chicago's tech scene about my work. Turns out, destroying someone publicly can backfire if that someone has actual talent. I landed 3 smaller contracts that collectively exceeded what Pinnacle would have paid. Mom's condition stabilized with better medical care. Dad's mobility improved with professional physical therapy. And I learned that sometimes being called a leech by someone who's actually draining your blood is the wake-up call you need to stop being too generous with the wrong people. The last time Blake tried to film me for content, I was carrying Dad's oxygen concentrator upstairs. But instead of hiding or feeling ashamed, I looked directly into his camera and said, "This is what love looks like. Try it sometime." He deleted the video without posting it.